From the late 8th century onward, England entered a period of sustained pressure that would permanently reshape its political, cultural, and territorial identity. The Viking Age did not arrive as a sudden invasion, but as a slow escalation rooted in conditions far beyond the English coast. To understand why Viking raids became so devastating, it is necessary to understand the world the Vikings came from. Scandinavia in the early medieval period was not a unified region. It consisted of fragmented societies spread across what is now Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Political authority was local and personal. Power rested with chieftains who controlled land, followers, and access to resources. Wealth was measured not only in land, but in silver, livestock, and reputation. Violence and honor were deeply intertwined, and success in warfare brought both material gain and social prestige. Population pressure, limited arable land, and the lure of foreign wealth encouraged expansion. Advances in shipbuilding technology allowed Scandinavian sailors to travel farther and faster than most of their contemporaries. Their longships were shallow-drafted, fast, and capable of navigating both open seas and inland rivers. This mobility gave Vikings a decisive strategic advantage. The earliest Viking encounters with England were exploratory. Small groups tested coastal defenses, identifying vulnerable targets. Monasteries stood out immediately. They held accumulated wealth in the form of silver, gold, and religious artifacts. They were often isolated and lightly defended. More importantly, they symbolized authority and stability in a fragmented world. The attack on Lindisfarne in 793 sent shockwaves across Christian Europe. Contemporary accounts describe the event as a divine punishment, a sign of moral decay. Yet from a strategic perspective, the raid revealed something far more practical. England was exposed. Its wealth was accessible. Its political divisions limited coordinated defense. Over the following decades, Viking raids became a recurring feature of English life. Coastal settlements faced repeated attacks. Rivers became invasion routes. Raiding parties adapted quickly, learning where resistance was weakest and where escape was easiest. At first, Anglo-Saxon rulers treated these attacks as isolated incidents. They responded locally, raising temporary forces to repel individual raids. This approach proved insufficient. Viking groups were not bound to a single region or kingdom. When resistance increased in one area, they simply shifted elsewhere. The lack of centralized command among English kingdoms allowed Vikings to dictate the pace and location of conflict. By the mid-9th century, Viking strategy evolved again. Raiding was no longer enough. Seasonal returns to Scandinavia limited long-term gains. Instead, larger forces began arriving with the intention of remaining. Camps were established, fortified, and supplied. These were not accidental developments, but deliberate adaptations. The arrival of the Great Heathen Army around 865 marked a turning point. This force was composed of multiple Viking groups operating under coordinated leadership. It moved systematically through England, targeting political centers rather than isolated targets. Its goal was control. Northumbria was the first major kingdom to fall. Internal rivalries weakened its ability to respond. Once its leadership collapsed, resistance fragmented. East Anglia followed soon after, its ruler captured and killed. Mercia, once dominant, found itself squeezed between Viking-controlled territory and Wessex. As Viking armies advanced, Their impact extended beyond battlefields. Agricultural production was disrupted. Trade networks shifted. Local elites were displaced or forced to negotiate. Control of land increasingly depended on the ability to field armed followers rather than hereditary legitimacy. Wessex emerged as the final obstacle. Unlike other kingdoms, it benefited from relatively stable leadership and geography that favored defense. Even so, it faced catastrophic defeats. Viking forces penetrated deep into its territory, occupying key locations and forcing repeated retreats. Alfred, the King of Wessex, came closer to total defeat than later legend often admits. At his lowest point, he was reduced to guerrilla resistance, hiding in marshlands and surviving with a small band of supporters. Yet this period of crisis forced innovation. Rather than relying solely on traditional military responses, Alfred restructured the foundations of defense. The system of buzz transformed the landscape. These fortified settlements were positioned strategically to control roads, rivers, and population centers. They ensured that no community was far from protection and that Viking forces could not move freely without confrontation. Military obligations were reorganized. Service was no longer entirely seasonal. Garrisons ensured continuous readiness. Resources were mobilized more efficiently. Defense became systemic rather than reactive. Equally important was the recognition that warfare was not only physical but administrative. Alfred promoted literacy, law, and record-keeping. Governance strengthened legitimacy. Authority became tied to stability rather than constant warfare. The Battle of Edington in 878 did not end the Viking presence, but it changed its nature. The agreement that followed formalized coexistence. The Danelaw emerged not as a temporary concession, but as a structured region governed under Scandinavian legal customs. Within the Danelaw, Viking settlers established farms, towns, and trade routes. Their presence altered land use and economic patterns. These settlements were not isolated colonies, but integrated systems connected to Scandinavia and continental Europe. Cultural exchange accelerated. Norse gods and Christian beliefs coexisted uneasily before gradual conversion. Intermarriage blurred ethnic boundaries. Over time, distinctions between Viking and English became less rigid. The influence of the Danelaw extended far beyond politics. Legal concepts, linguistic patterns, and place names embedded Scandinavian presence into the English landscape. Even after political control shifted, cultural influence remained. Successors to Alfred continued the slow process of consolidation. Expansion was deliberate and incremental. Rather than destroying Viking settlements, English rulers absorbed them. Authority expanded through administration as much as conquest. By the early 10th century, England was no longer a collection of rival kingdoms. It was becoming a single political entity. This transformation was not inevitable. It was a direct response to external pressure. The Viking Age revealed the weaknesses of fragmentation and the advantages of coordination. It forced England to adapt, centralize, and redefine power. What began as raids driven by opportunity ended as a catalyst for nation building. Yet this transformation came at a cost. Entire generations lived under constant threat. Communities were displaced. Wealth was extracted and redistributed. The memory of Viking violence lingered long after stability returned. England emerged from the Viking Age stronger, but also more complex. Its identity had been reshaped by outsiders who became insiders. The boundary between conqueror and subject dissolved into shared history. The Viking Age did not conclude with a clear ending. Scandinavian influence persisted through trade, settlement, and political ambition. Even as England consolidated, the North Sea remained a shared world rather than a dividing line. In the next episode, this fragile unity will face its ultimate test, as a new claimant from across the Channel asserts a right to the English throne, leading to a conquest that will redefine England's place in Europe forever.